When I first received this device, I thought it would be quick and easy to review, but to say that this particular handheld has really surprised me would be an understatement. And what I thought would be a generic passover device has actually reminded me of why I love retro handhelds so much. And it's the Anbernic RG35XX H. Let's start with a quick unboxing. The box itself looks great and has gold accents, and the device is well protected inside. Also in the box you get a screen protector that unfortunately doesn't really fit, a manual, and a USB-C to USB-C cable. By the way, this device was sent to me to review by GoGameGeek. I'll leave a link in the description box below in case you want to check out the RG35XX H yourself. And if you use the code RB77 on their website, you'll get 15% off anything you order. So here's the handheld itself. The transparent white color that I have here looks very nice and has a frosted effect that isn't too garish. It's very small and light and immediately feels pretty great in the hands, and the quality seems really high at first glance, especially for the low price. The RG35XX H has a full dual analog stick control layout, which is a lot different from its predecessor, the 35XX Plus. But of course, all things considered, this is a pretty different device, with a horizontal candy bar layout. On the front you'll see the dual sticks and the all-membrane buttons. On the top you'll see inline shoulder buttons, a 3.5mm headphone jack, USB for OTG, a mini HDMI port, a USB-C port for charging, which also works for peripherals too, and finally the function button. On the right hand side there's a power button and a reset button which has smartly been recessed and is pretty stiff to push, meaning you won't hit it accidentally. On the left hand side there's a volume rocker, and on the bottom you'll see dual speakers and dual SD slots. One SD card for the operating system and one SD card for games. On the back you'll see an information panel which you cannot read at all on this model, and Anbernic's trademark rubber pads. Overall this device looks absolutely great. It's tiny, compact, fully featured, and looks very smart. It also feels way more premium than the price might lead you to believe. Before we go on to talk about controls and performance, let's talk about the specifications. The RG35XX H comes with an all-winner H700 CPU, accompanied by a G31 GPU. It has 1GB of RAM, but don't worry, that's more than enough. A 3300 mAh battery, the dual SD card setup with no onboard memory at all, a 3.5-inch screen with a 4:3 aspect ratio and resolution of 640 by 480 pixels, 2.4 and 5 GHz Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 4.2 on board, dual stereo speakers, and USB-C to USB-C charging. So now let's take a look at the controls. And the first thing that you'll probably notice here is the Nintendo Switch style sticks. I couldn't find anything conclusive as to whether these are hole sensor sticks or not, but I also don't really care. And they feel just fine on a handheld like this. They have a good range of motion and are recessed enough that they don't stick up too far. However, they do have a big problem, which is that they unfortunately snap heavily to the 8 directions, and almost don't register at all between around 1 and 70%. They have a very sharp input curve, which makes many analog stick-based games difficult to play. For example, Sonic Adventure 2, where your character will move either straight or in sharp diagonals instead of smoothly, meaning that you can't adjust your trajectory when moving at speed, which can make it hard to hit ramps. In GoldenEye N64, aiming is essentially impossible, and this is such a disappointment. Powkiddy solved this problem in the RGB30, so why it's here on an Anbernic device I have no idea. I am kind of willing to let it slide in the grand scheme of things, given that this device is focused heavily on retro gaming, and that the sticks are kind of a bonus, but it's still a shame to see. As for the face buttons, well, these are Anbernic's usual great quality. They have a membrane, thunky feeling, and they're glossy and they feel great under the thumb. They're also very tactile and stick up plenty when depressed. No complaints about these whatsoever. And the D-pad is similarly great, with a membrane thunkiness and a tactile feeling. It also pivots very nicely on the center point. And surprisingly, there are seemingly very few false diagonals. This is a big improvement over the RG35XX. And if you look at this footage here of DuckTales on NES, Scrooge doesn't crouch as I change direction from left to right. This is kind of strange to me because I heard a lot of complaints about this D-pad, but I found it to be pretty amazing. The start and select buttons are membranes as well, and they feel very good. When it comes to the shoulders though, they're inline and very clicky. And honestly, these are just kind of there for being there. They're not particularly amazing, and they are a little bit too loud in my opinion. But in general use, they haven't bothered me too much. All in all, I find the controls on the RG35XX H to be very comfortable. No matter whether you want to use the D-pad and the face buttons or an analog stick and the shoulders, everything is well within reach and very comfortable. And I think it was a really good decision for Anbernic to put the D-pad on the top on this device, rather than the analog stick, because it really focuses this device more as a retro gaming handheld, which is exactly what it's supposed to be. And even though it has a completely flat and boxy design, it's pretty comfortable to hold. I think that the lightweight combined with the rubber feet make it very easy to grip and hold for longer periods of time. All in all, I really like how it feels in the hands. When it comes to the screen, well, it's bright and vibrant and has great colors. The viewing angles are also really good. The 640 by 480 resolution at this size of screen has been tried and tested at this point, and the graphics look plenty crisp and clear, with defined pixels and sharp 3D graphics. And I have to say that having just reviewed the Anbernic RG405M, which is a heavily premium device, the screen on the H is way better than that, despite being a little bit smaller. And when it comes to the speakers, they're bottom firing and stereo, but you can block them with your thumbs, which means that the speakers are actually positioned correctly. These aren't groundbreaking by any means, but they sound perfectly good. And again, I would say these sound way better than the premium 405M. Which I think had some pretty dire speakers. Well, with all that out of the way, let's talk about gaming on the RG35XX H. And the retro gaming experience on this device is absolutely great. It has more than enough power to play all of your retro systems. And it is a wonderful experience thanks to these great controls and the great screen. The analog sticks are totally out of the way when you don't need them, and the device is light and comfortable to hold. The big draw of this device over the original 35XX is its increased power, and of course its horizontal layout. And when it comes to lower end 2D systems, you absolutely don't need to worry about it on this device. Everything including arcade games, the higher end Super Nintendo games, everything will work on this device absolutely flawlessly. And with all that in mind, let's explore the experience of higher level emulation on this device. When it comes to PlayStation 1, this is literally a perfect and conquered experience. There is nothing that doesn't work absolutely perfectly in my experience. I've been able to upscale to high resolution 3D for most if not all games. And you can even go into the RetroArch settings and disable threaded video to improve controller latency. And every game will still work perfectly. And of course you can use the analog sticks for games that require a DualShock, like Ape Escape. And honestly, this is just a blast, even with the kinda broken sticks. You also have plenty of power available with this device to fast forward PlayStation 1 games if you want to. So if you want to play your favorite PS1 JRPGs, you can skip through all of the grinding and all of the slower paced elements. By the way, while I'm thinking about DualShocks, the vibration on the 35XX is also very nice. It's not that type of vibration that kind of rattles, it's actually more of a pleasant rumble, which is very reminiscent of the original DualShock, and I like it a lot. It's usually something I don't mention or talk about, but I did notice how nice it was on this handheld in particular. The next system we'll take a look at is Nintendo DS. And Nintendo DS performance is also perfect, even if you want to use enhanced 3D resolution in 3D heavy games. Also, the left stick works very well for controlling the virtual stylus, and then you can click R3 to simulate screen contact. You can also use L2 and R2 to change your screen layouts. And in general, as long as your game doesn't require a lot of touch or dual screen gameplay, you'll get along just fine. Unfortunately though, there's no microphone support, or the ability to map the virtual microphone in the current version of the emulator. I know we can't add microphone support here, but I at least hope that they update this emulator to support virtual microphone at some point. When it comes to Dreamcast, many Dreamcast games will run well, which really surprised me. But there also seems to be a large number of unplayably slow Dreamcast games as well. Sonic Adventure 2 is one of those games that's pretty much perfect out of the box, and I've actually made more progress in this game than I usually do. And so far everything has been more or less perfect, without tinkering with any settings. But on the other hand, Dead or Alive 2 has some pretty distracting slowdown and I wouldn't really call it playable. In general though, this is way better performance than I imagined it would be, and at this price it's positively stunning. Some games will even support limited fast forward as well. When it comes to PSP, we're kind of already over the limit of what this device can offer. Some games will work well, but many of them don't. The stock SD card that came with mine had a collection of PS Minis, which just about sums it up, I think. Many of the actual PSP games you're going to want to play are laggy and slow. A game that does work really well is Soul Calibur Broken Destiny, but there's definitely some noticeable slowdown. And on the other hand, God of War Chains of Olympus is obviously unplayable. The main problem though is the tiny game area you get, because this is a tiny 4x3 display. So in general, I wouldn't say this device is particularly good for PSP. Finally, let's take a look at N64, because yeah, you can actually play some N64 on this handheld. However, the performance is generally inconsistent, but again, there are some games that will work well. In Diddy Kong Racing, the game worked completely fine, but only when no other racers were close by. At the beginning of a race or whenever anybody else caught up to me, it kinda started to chug pretty heavily. With Mario 64, it's generally just a little bit slow, but I'd say it was still fun enough to play. At least in the first level. Overall, the performance of the RG35XX H is absolutely amazing, and really amazing for the price point, especially when it's combined with the overall high quality of the device. Any Dreamcast, PSP, or N64 at this price is kind of crazy, but also the absolute maxed out PS1, DS, and 2D retro gaming experience just make it a really consistent and reliable device. However, this might be kind of strange of me to say, but I do find this level of power to be just kind of odd on this handheld, because it's only really tangibly better than the original 35XX, because of the ability to upscale and fast forward PS1 and play DS. Everything above that is kind of a 50-50 experience. I'm not necessarily complaining here, I just think it's kind of a weird performance point, and I would just be really cautious in thinking that this device is going to play anything above PS1 and DS with any level of consistency. Hopefully you'll understand what I'm saying. I'm not complaining by any means, it's just kind of a strange performance level. But I think that in the end, the fact of the matter is that most things that you're going to want to play on this device are going to work really well. And that for the price point, it's really impressive. So now I want to take a little detour and talk about software. Because really, am I the only one here that thinks that the stock software on the RG35XX H is, well, pretty darn great? It has some problems such as translation issues and a bit of a lack of polish, but from everything I've heard, I expected this to be totally unusable, when it is definitely not. In fact, I'd say this is perfectly serviceable as a basic gaming operating system. So let me go on a deep dive here. Here's what the operating system looks like, and it's pretty basic. You get this simple, although admittedly kind of weird, home menu. The Game Rooms section is for standalone emulators, which you really only want to use for PSP and DS, and basically nothing else. Outside of DS and PSP, the non-RetroArch emulators have a weird in-game menu that's pretty clunky and just isn't very good. However, the RA Games section is for RetroArch, and you'll want to use this for everything else. Inside the RA Game menu, you'll see a list of systems and then your game. The game lists are numbered, which is kind of annoying, and even if you add your own game, they'll have a number in the list. But what you need to do here is to select a game to jump right in. But let's say you want to play, for example, an arcade game with a specific RetroArch core, you can press the Y button to select one, which I think is a really good feature. On the game list, you can also press start to add a game to your favorites, and then access it in the favorites menu. If you notice at the top of this menu, it'll tell you the name of the system of the game, and then RA in yellow if the favorited version of the game will be running in RetroArch. If RA isn't there, you know you've favorited one with a standalone emulator. If you press start in the favorite menu, it will remove the favorite from the list. There's also a recents menu and a very good search function. Just type and the list will begin to populate by itself. I'd say the biggest problem with this is that it's missing a way to enter a hyphen character and other symbols. But in the list, it's actually going to show every matched game twice. And once again, at the top, it's going to say RA if you've selected the RetroArch version of the game. And once again in this list, you can press Y to select a specific core. This is just a really flexible and really good search function. And if you're the kind of person that wants to have like 10,000 games on your device, it makes it very easy to find the games that you want quickly. And the matching of games seems to be much better on this operating system than others I've used in the past. I would certainly say that the biggest gap here is the inability to add symbols and perhaps Japanese characters for Japanese games as well. Once you're in a RetroArch game, pressing the function button on the top of the device will open the RetroArch menu. And this is a full version of RetroArch, with all the options and configuration you might expect. You can change settings for your specific core, or set up the configuration of the entire RetroArch system if you want to. And if you're connected to Wi-Fi, you can even enable retro achievements or set up netplay with another device. You can do basically anything that you would do on any other RetroArch based device. And so whereas this isn't baked into the operating system, you still get all the flexibility of a full RetroArch, which I think is a really, really good thing. Also, while you're in-game, hotkeys are available, and they're all documented in the manual. In general, the setup is pretty much standard and what I would expect. For example, holding function and pressing R1 will save a state, L1 will load a state, R2 will fast forward, and L2 will go into slow motion. You can even take a screenshot with function and B, or hold function and use the volume keys to change the brightness while you're in game. Pressing function and start will quit your current game. And all of this is documented in the included manual. Actually, before I forget, I do have one complaint, which is that the function button is in a really awkward position, and is too recessed and stiff, which can make it annoying and uncomfortable to push, especially for hotkeys. It's not a huge deal, but it's definitely something I noticed. Despite my overall positive impression of the operating system here, it does seem a little unstable sometimes and has crashed on me. However, I'm happy to say it's never crashed while I've just been simply playing a game. And it's only when I've been messing around with too many RetroArch settings or saving configs and stuff like that that it's crashed. But if it does crash out, you do have the hard reset button, so it's really not a huge problem. Honestly, with everything considered here, I think this stock operating system is pretty darn fantastic. And it's definitely the type of OS you could easily give to somebody who's unfamiliar with retro handhelds or technology, and they would probably be able to poke their way around and get into a game or two. I think it's a really well-designed operating system, and I'm actually a huge fan of it. The only thing I really hate about the OS is that when you quit a game, you get this big game over screen, which just feels kinda bad. I will also say it's a little bit slow getting in and out of games. Listen, I'm not saying that there aren't substantial improvements that could be made to this operating system, but all I'm saying is that I think it's perfectly good enough, and it leaves very little to be desired if all you want to do is to turn your device on, jump into a game, and play. And I think that Anbernic should actually get some credit for this. I think it's pretty good. If you don't want to use the stock operating system, there are some custom firmware options available, such as Batocera Lite, which will give you an emulation station front end, MinUI, which is a simple operating system, and the Garlic 2.0 Alpha. Now, Garlic is pretty famous on the original 35XX, but I've never really been a huge fan of it. And bear in mind it's still very much in a buggy alpha state, so it might not be the best to put on this device. Personally, I'm not somebody who wants to use custom firmware just for the sake of using custom firmware. And I personally see no real reason to use an unfinished custom firmware instead of the stock version at this time. It's not the best or most attractive at all, but in general it's just perfectly fine for loading and playing the games that you want. And stuff like configuring multiple controllers, Wi-Fi, Moonlight, RetroArch, and more. It works well enough, and most importantly, it lets you jump in and out of your games, and use hotkeys in games easily and reliably enough. Also, I want to mention that there have been a few official updates as well, and it's really great to see that Anbernic has been spending some real time to actually improve this OS. The biggest update recently was a change to the overall theme, and I think it looks really nice now. So let's talk about a few of the additional features that the RG35XX H has to offer. Firstly is Wi-Fi, and with the onboard Wi-Fi, you can set up things like retro achievements or netplay within RetroArch itself, or you can use a built-in Moonlight streaming client. Now, this is very rudimentary, and you can access it from the Wi-Fi settings. It does take quite a lot of tinkering to get working, and you need to re-enter your computer's IP address every time. And the aspect ratio is totally screwed, but hey, it's at least something, and this could definitely be improved somewhat. I definitely think that this is a very niche bonus use case for a device like this, so I'm not too upset that it doesn't work perfectly, but it's still pretty impressive that it's built in. The next bonus feature that this device has to offer is HDMI output, using the mini HDMI port on the top of the device. When you connect it to a screen, it will stretch to 16:9, which is great for playing compatible PSP games, WonderSwan, or stretching your PS1 or compatible Dreamcast games to widescreen. It's also a hot plug experience, which means that you can plug the cable in or pull it out whenever you want without having to reboot the device. Although I would really recommend only doing this on the operating system menu, because if you're in-game and you pull the cable out or plug it in, it might just crash. But if you're just sitting in the menu, just feel free to plug your cable in and it'll output to the TV immediately. And of course you need some controllers, so why not use the RG35XX H's onboard Bluetooth to connect some controllers. X-input controllers work perfectly out of the box, but direct input controllers might need some remapping in your emulator to work properly. At least that was my experience. And you can connect multiple controllers. In fact, why not connect 4 controllers and play some 4-player arcade or Super Nintendo games? You can even just connect 3 wireless controllers and then use the 35XX H itself as the 4th. It absolutely works and works very well on this device. So even the totally stock RG35XX H is totally consoleable. And you could plug in an external speaker into the 3.5mm headphone jack, a charger to keep it powered up, a USB peripheral such as a dock, and the HDMI all at once. And for what is essentially a $60 to $70 device, I think that's absolutely amazing. So that's the Anbernic RG35XX H. Now before I wrap up with my final summary of what I really think of this device, I'll go over my likes and dislikes, starting with my likes. Firstly is the size, weight, and comfort. Because this handheld is compact, it barely weighs a thing, and it's comfortable to hold. I think that the white color looks really nice. I'm a really huge fan of this color scheme. The dual analog sticks make the device more flexible when it comes to Dreamcast and perhaps arcade games. The performance on offer here is seriously good for the price. I think the stock software included with the RG35XX is pretty darn great, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend that it's not. This is a handheld that's very versatile when it comes to consoleization, with the ability to output to the TV and connect wireless controllers without any messing around. I like that the built-in reset button lets you easily get out of any crashes or any jams that you might be in. I also like the dual SD card setup with no onboard memory, which means that if you ever screw up really bad, you can just reflash the OS to the SD card and you're good to go, and you won't lose any of your games. I also really like the battery life. It's very good and it charges quickly with USB-C. Overall, I gotta say that this handheld is just really nice. There's just something about it. And now for my dislikes, and the first is going to be the analog sticks. Whereas I'm glad that these are here for extra flexibility, there's no reason that they should be totally broken in terms of input, and they are tangibly bad in games that require sensitive analog stick input. Next is the shoulder buttons, which in my opinion are just a little bit too clicky. Next is that the function button is poorly placed and hard to push, and that's especially noticeable when you're trying to use hotkeys. And finally, the included screen protector just doesn't really work. And that's due to the curved edges of the screen, which means that you just can't really apply it and it just floats on top of the screen. I guess this is just the nature of the shape of the screen that they used, but I still wish I could put a proper screen protector on here somehow. Overall, I have absolutely had a blast with the Anbernic RG35XX H, and this is a handheld that has really surprised me. I honestly thought that this would end up being one of those generic toss-away devices that you just kind of use for a while but it's not particularly impressive. But actually I think it is really impressive. As a retro gaming handheld, it does everything it should be able to do and doesn't break a sweat doing it. It's light and comfortable, the controls feel good, the battery life is good, the screen is great, the speakers are good enough, and yes, even the included operating system out of the box is perfectly serviceable, and I have no problems with it at all. And if you really want to push this device a lot further, you can play some pretty reliable Dreamcast, Nintendo DS, and then some PSP and N64 as well. For absolutely everything below that level, this device conquers it all, including high-resolution 3D PS1 and fast forwarding. And I honestly really couldn't love this any more than I do. This reminds me of why simple handhelds such as the original Miyoo Mini struck such a chord with me. Because sure, you can get an Android-based device that can play a million different systems and you can tinker with it endlessly for days on end if you want to, or you can just have a really simple device like this that just works and works out of the box. And the overwhelming majority of the time I've had the RG35XX H, I've been playing games rather than doing anything else. And that experience has been a really great one. And now it's your turn. Let me know what you think of the Anbernic RG35XX H in the comment box below. And if you're interested in one or planning to pick one up, please go ahead and check the description box below for links where you'll find it on GoGameGeek. And if you use the coupon code RB77, you'll get 15% off your order. And for that price, I think this is a pretty spectacular handheld. I want to say a huge thanks to you for watching this video, and if you did like it, please go ahead and leave a like on the video and subscribe to RetroBreeze for more great content just like this. And that's this one done. Thank you very much for watching RetroBreeze, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.